Super excited to host this panel. It's been a couple of months in the making, and so it really means a lot for you all to join. So my name is Hania. I'm an organizer with the Palestinian Social Fund, and I'm also affiliated with the Institute for Social Ecology. The Institute for Social Ecology has been offering radical education for activists and organizers for over 50 years. We offer a 1 week intensive once a year, as well as online courses and self-directed courses, all with the ethics of direct democracy and building a free and ecological society. And so if you're looking for educational opportunities and to meet other people with similar work, please check out our website. We have a lot of cool programming happening in 2026. And I'll pass it on to Adam to talk a little bit about the Palestinian Social Fund.
Thanks, Hania. My name is Adam, and I organize with the Palestinian Social Fund. The Palestinian Social Fund started in 2021, and it was started in order to fill the gap that is in the aid that's going to Palestine. Most of the aid that goes to Palestine goes to kind of topical aid, things of humanitarian nature, which is very important. But there is a lack or underserved gap, which is developmental and liberationist development capital that goes to Palestine. And so we wanted to direct funds that are unconditional, because there's a lot of capital that goes to Palestine with conditions on depoliticizing the struggle. And so we wanted to be unconditional in order for the Palestinian struggle to stay alive and to stay within the work that we do on the ground. And so we saw that cooperativism is the right path for us to support. And there was already a network of cooperatives that had started in about 2015, 2017. We met Rami, who's with us today, and who also organizes with the cooperatives on the ground. We started to meet more of those cooperatives, and we thought this is what Palestinians in the diaspora, this is what allies and friends of the Palestinian struggle need to support on the ground, because it's the thing that takes us back to the land where we continue to root ourselves, build agricultural cooperatives, and then also build cooperatives of other functions in order to strengthen the communities. And cooperatives in their nature are a political venture rather than a business venture. They take a political stance about taking back strength into the communities rather than giving up that to some type of governmental control or that of the occupation in the case of the Palestinians. And so the cooperatives are now expanding and growing, and the PSF has been able to support with about $250,000 in the last 4 years. And we want to push to achieve food sovereignty to whatever degree we can under the occupation, as a way to create self-sustenance for the people, so they can be strong and be able to break the shackles of the occupation, which tries to keep the economy captive and control the people through the food and through the workplace opportunities or the work opportunities that are available. So we are providing an alternative, work opportunities on the land, going back to the land and being able to sell produce and fight off the produce that is coming from the occupation that is trying to flood the economy of the Palestinians. So we are dependent on the occupation at all times. And we are helping to support the movement towards alternatives of that sort, and build an alternative to the topical humanitarian aid that is the majority of aid that goes to Palestinians, but rather we need aid, financial support that actually drives towards liberation directly. And this is the work of the cooperatives that's happening on the ground. And we hope to hear more from the speakers as well on cooperatives in Palestine and across the UK and the US and how they see that developing over time. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, so like Adam was saying, we have four incredible panelists. We're hoping to talk about popular committees, the First Intifada, what it looks like to build a resistance economy under occupation. Um, and so we have a couple of pre-prepared questions, but if you have questions, please hold them to the end. We'll have time. And so if you have questions, just hold those. But I first wanted to start out by hearing more from our Palestinian comrades on, the role of cooperatives, the history of the First Intifada, the history of the popular committees. During the First Intifada, popular committees were instrumental to building power within the Palestinian masses. Palestinians organized themselves in committees, that were usually quite small, and each committee had different purposes. There were committees for farming. There were committees for creating and producing agricultural and dairy products. There were committees for prisoner support as well as education. And Mazen, one of our speakers, has done a lot of work documenting the work of these committees during the First Intifada. And his family was actually involved in building some of these committees in Beit Sahur. And so, Mazen, could you talk a bit more about the role of these popular committees in building popular power within the Palestinian people during the First Intifada? I think you're muted, Mazen.
Sorry, I'm mute. Okay. I said thank you very much for hosting this and for opening a discussion on this very important subject. Yeah, and we had as Palestinians actually 15 uprisings. This uprising, the Gaza Ghetto uprising, is number 15. The first uprising was actually in 1880, 81, when Palestinian farmers in the areas that were taken to build colonies like Petah Tikva and Rishon LeZion rose up against the reallocation of their land to benefit the settlers. Since then, as I said, we had many uprisings. So the uprising you're asking me about is the 1987 to 1991 uprising. That uprising started in Gaza. Some uprisings start in other parts of Palestine when as they say, the straw that breaks the camel's back. Uprisings come and go in waves, basically, and that's understandable. Generational shift every 10 years to 12 years, there's an uprising. So these uprisings are understandable and natural in this case. The uprising of 1987 to 1991, every uprising has its unique features and its unique lessons and unique things that we should study for our history so that we can. In Africa, there were also 15 uprisings before apartheid officially ended, although there is still economic apartheid. So I'm kind of optimistic that this 15 uprising, that the number 15 in Palestine will be just as lucky as the number 15 in South Africa in terms of uprisings. But anyway, the uprising of 1987 to 1991, which I studied well also in terms of the historical record throughout Palestine, not just in my village of Beit Sahur, but throughout Palestine, including in Gaza and so forth. It was called the Uprising of the Stones because Palestinian children mostly were throwing stones. That's when Rabin was in charge, and he said to his soldiers to break the bones of Palestinian children who participate in demonstrations. And they literally took that order to exactly, and started breaking bones after they catch Palestinian children. Of course, in this uprising, they don't break bones, they just break heads. They shoot people straight up or torture them to death in prison. But anyways, um, the village that I'm in, Beit Sahur, the shepherd's field, is where the shepherds heard the angels sing, told them to go to Bethlehem, where Jesus was born. This village is about 70% Christian, 30% Muslim. It's mostly known for having artisans making souvenirs for basically religious pilgrims to Bethlehem, since we are less than a kilometer from Bethlehem, and selling those souvenirs, olive wood, mother of pearl, and so on. This is the main industry of Beit Sahur, as it was before, of course. And we were also known for some agriculture, including the snake cucumber. Fakus Sahuri is very famous kind of the decision that was made a few months after the uprising started, with Palestinians in Beit Sahur deciding to basically engage in civil disobedience. So that means collecting their ID cards, refusing to carry the ID cards that are mandated by the Israeli colonial occupation. They also refused to pay taxes. So the Israeli military, came and surrounded the town and basically laid siege to the town. It's about 12,000 people in Beit Sahur, as I said, 70% Christian, 30% Muslim. Just about everybody in town refused to pay taxes. No taxation without representation, so to speak. So the Israeli military, of course, laid siege to the town and started pillaging it. Um, the people of the town had prepared for these contingencies by, as you mentioned, creating committees, which was present in other towns also, like an education committee if they close the school, to get the children educated, and a farm committee or agriculture committee that helps teach people how to plant things in their backyards, things like that. For example, my friend Jad Ishaq was in charge of the Ag Committee, since his degree was in agriculture, and so they tried to have self-sustaining systems even under siege situations. Of course, the siege was not as strong as, let's say, the siege in Gaza these days. Of course, not much can go through, not and even the tunnels have been mostly demolished. But in our town, there was still a little bit of leakage, if you want, across the siege. So we were able to, for example, seeds and seedlings from Jericho, sometimes smuggled through other means, like people who have jobs in other places have to go, they would hide some things in their cars and stuff like that. So there was an education committee, there was an agricultural committee, there was social committee, there was women committees, there were media and communication committee that was charged with communicating to the rest of the world, because civil disobedience and actions like this need some media coverage. That was also facilitated in our case because, as I said, we are the Shepherd's Field, so it's a tour town. So many people in Beit Sahur speak many languages, whether it's English, Italian, French, whatever. So another thing that this communication committee did was reach out to, let's say, uh, Western journalists and also embassies, even consulates, Some consulates were more receptive than others, of course, and came to break the siege of Beit Sahur, and they succeeded actually. They brought at one time hundreds of internationals. They were smuggled into the town through one of the open dirt roads towards the town. And now it's difficult, of course, to do this because our siege is involving walls and fences here in Bethlehem area and gates and checkpoints and so on. But anyway, a few hundred people showed up, including Israelis, by the way, and internationals. And then they assembled near the church in the middle of the town, the church and the mosque in the middle of the town. And then they marched to the checkpoint between Beit Sahur and Bethlehem. And this was a very effective action. It broke the siege in Beit Sahur, even though the tax problems continued and people were pitched because they refused to pay the tax. So these kinds of actions continued, of course, until 1991 and the Gulf War and the Madrid and subsequently the treacherous Oslo Accords that basically blew the wind out of this uprising like the previous uprisings before it. It subsided like the 1936 to 1939 uprising that involved also a lot of committees and a lot of boycott, a lot of other things, strikes and sanctions and refusal to pay taxes and so on. This is in brief what happened. I will tell you just one funny story about this period for those of you who didn't hear it. Our village also smuggled in 17 cows. One of them was pregnant, so they became 18 cows. This was against the military order that says Palestinians cannot own milking cows. So there's documentary about this now. You can see it on YouTube and elsewhere. It's called The Wanted 18 for the wanted cows that the Israeli military started the military operation. They have to name their operations, so they called it Operation Hunt Cow. So, so it was a kind of an interesting experience of with the cows and stuff like that. This again shows, people when they have a will, they try many things, and sometimes they succeed, sometimes they don't succeed, but they have to keep trying. Anyways, this in brief, and we can talk more later in the question and answer if you want more about Beit Sahur. But I'm proud of my town. Now there's a new settlement being built. This is a second settlement on the land of Beit Sahur, major settlement that took land even from our home was built on Jabal Abu Ghnaim, Palestinian hill between us. Now they plan to build another settlement in an area we call Ush Ghrab, and they now want to call it Shdima settlement. So the struggle continues, even though popular resistance in my town is virtually non-existent now, as the circumstances have changed dramatically in the past few years.
Thank you so much for that context and that history. Mazen, I really appreciate it. I'm sure we're going to have a lot of questions about Beit Sahur. I realize now you didn't get the chance to introduce yourself. So if you would like to introduce yourself to everyone, please do so. Apologies for that.
Yeah. So my name is Mazen Kumsi. I'm actually born in Beit Sahur, raised there, and hopefully will die there, inshallah, not too soon, but we'll see. I was involved in popular resistance. I wrote a book about popular resistance in Palestine. I wrote a book about sharing the land of Canaan, about one democratic country, published in 2005. I write a lot. I publish about 2 research papers every month in areas ranging from biodiversity to human rights to environmental justice to colonial and decolonial processes, etc. But I'm also active on the ground. Me and a few other volunteers, we started this Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability, which is where I am now, actually. I spend 15 hours a day, 7 days a week here, all volunteer effort, by the way. I don't take any money from anybody. Actually, the reverse, my wife and I donated $250,000 to start this project. Of our retirement, when I worked in the US in medical schools and stuff, to this institute. The institute is focused on sustainable human and natural communities. So we work with farmers, with women, with children, etc., to ensure food sovereignty. We have a seed bank here also. We have a nice botanic garden and a community garden here. We have a museum of natural history. I can send you a link for, actually somebody put the website for our institute. Thanks, Noor. Put it in the chat so you can look at it, and I'll put a link for a short video which you can watch at your leisure, 6.5 minutes, about the work of the institute. For example, some of my students worked on issues of permaculture. When Adam, for example, was speaking about the Palestinian Social Fund, what they do, some of these farms and so forth, we have worked with for years now, for one of them for 3 decades that we have worked with them. But anyways, we try to do what we can with what limited resources that we have. 70% of our labor is from volunteers. So if any of you want to volunteer, you're welcome. We provide room and board for volunteers. And you can go to that website, palestinenature.org, to see how you can help volunteer here.
Thank you, Mazen. Yeah, I would encourage everyone to go look at Mazen's work and read his book. It's really good. And I will pass it on to our other panelist that's also calling in from occupied Palestine. Rami, if you'd like to introduce yourself. And feel free to do so in Arabic, we can translate إذا بدك.
Okay, the introduction will be in English, then the questions in Arabic. I'm Rami Masad. I'm from Aboud village. I'm working as a social program coordinator at the Popular Arts Center. My work focus on motivate, network the grassroots organizations who have the power on the land, as Adam mentioned, and how have the exchange and the capacities between them, and to do campaigns and national activities at national level, like supporting farmers, doing the cooperatives, and supporting the refugee camp that they displaced the last year on the genocide. Thank you.
And Rami, we would love to learn about, Mazen talked about the First Intifada and the role of popular committees in building power. And I was wondering if you could talk about, what we can learn from the First Intifada for today's context in the West Bank.
Okay.
Rami, no, 1 to 2 sentences and then I can translate.
راح اسلط الضوء على 4 عناوين او فقرات صغيره، وكل فقره احسن عشان ما نضيعش المساله، بحاول باختصار كتير.
Okay.
تمام. يعني بفكر في 4 دروس مستفادة مهمة، وأولها آم، بعد حوالي 40 سنة من الانتفاضة، المهمة الأساسية هلا للشعب الفلسطيني أماكن تواجده كلها وتحديدا في الضفة الغربية، إنه إحنا نطفق أو نعرف حالنا أو نعرف السياق أو الحالة اللي إحنا عم نعيش فيها. هل إحنا عم نبني في مؤسسات الدولة وهم هاي المؤسسات، واللي الاحتلال الإسرائيلي على مدار كل هاي السنوات هو دمر كل مقومات وأسس هاي الدولة، من السيطرة على الأرض وضمها، من تهويد مدينة القدس، من تصفية حق اللاجئين بالعودة، وإلى آخره من كل هاي السياسات والإخضاع الشامل. أم إحنا شعب عم بيرزخ تحت هذا الاحتلال وعم بناضل من أجل حريته وخلاصه من هذا الاحتلال؟ لازم نحدد إحنا في أي حالة إحنا موجودين. فالإجابة على هاي السؤال مش تقنية، هي عملية، لأنه هذا الشيء بيساعدنا في تحديد كل أنماط العمل اللي بتنسجم مع هذا السياق التحرري اللي بيقوم على الصمود والمقاومة، مثل التعاونيات وأشكال التضامن الاجتماعي. بدل الاستمرار في حالة الوهم اللي هي هاي المؤسسات أو الوزارات المحاصرة حاليا، اللي حوصرت أدوارها في تقديم بعض الخدمات الأساسية اللي عم تاخذ عبء الاحتلال المفروض يكون فيها، بالإضافة للدور الأمني المنوط فيها والمنوط بالسلطة الفلسطينية بشكل عام.
Okay, I'll do my best to translate all the points, but he's gonna summarize his points into 4 main points, 4 main lessons that were learned from the Intifada. I think 40 years after the Intifada, one of the main things that we need to do as a Palestinian people is determine the true narrative or the reality that we are living under. Is it that we want to build, and this is maybe more for the context of the West Bank, do we want to build national institutions under this mirage of a nation under occupation that have been destroyed time and time again by the occupation, that have been besieged, controlled financially, and so on? And also the right of returns by the refugees has been destroyed. Everything that was signed on for Oslo never actually came to fruition. Or are we a people that are under occupation and are struggling for our liberation? And so we need to determine what that looks like, and that really it's the second case. And what does that mean for us, and what are the activities that we need to take on in order to liberate ourselves, because that's the main objective of the Palestinian struggle.
النقطة الثانية، انطلاقا من هذا الفهم التحرري، تبرز أهمية تعزيز الاكتفاء الذاتي والإنتاج المحلي كأحد وأهم أعمدة الصمود في مواجهة السياسة الإسرائيلية والحصار الاقتصادي والتجويع والعزل الجغرافي اللي عم بيصير حاليا في الضفة الغربية. احنا 1200 بوابة حديدية عم تعزل المدن الفلسطينية عن بعضها البعض، وعم تعزل القرى الفلسطينية عن بعضها البعض. فمن هنا وهذا الاكتفاء الذاتي والإنتاج المحلي أكيد بيتحقق من خلال دعم المشاريع الإنتاجية بفلسطين، والتركيز على الإنتاج بفلسطين، وتحديدا التعاونيات والحدائق المنزلية اللي كانت كلها منتشرة بفترة الانتفاضة الأولى وبالفترة السابقة، بالإضافة لكسر كل مسألة المركزية في الموارد والمبادرات. مثلا لما نحكي عن بنك بذور واحد بفلسطين، الاحتلال اعتدى عليه مؤخرا وبالتالي تعرض لخسائر كبيرة. فكيف نفكر في ظل هذا الفصل الجغرافي والعزل الجغرافي بإنشاء مكتبات بذور في الجغرافيا الفلسطينية المختلفة، في المدن المختلفة، في المزارع المختلفة، في التعاونيات المختلفة، يكون في عنا مكتبة بذور زي ما حكى مازن عن المكتبة الموجودة عنده. احنا بالعام 2025 عملنا مكتبة لمحافظة رام الله، جمعنا 52 صنف من البذور البلدية من المزارعين في منطقة رام الله، وهي المبادرة رح بمعنى نعممها للمحافظات الثانية خطوة ورا خطوة.
In this context, we need to understand that the main one of the main things that we need to do is move towards liberationist development. And liberationist development consists of returning to the land, what sprouts out of it is returning to the land and building food sovereignty and local production. We live under an occupation that has besieged every single town and city with 1,200 barriers in the last 2 years. Everything is controlled and transportation is controlled. Every movement is controlled. And so we need to go back to the land that can sustain us. Just like from the First Intifada, where we saw victory gardens grow either in balconies, on rooftops, or even in the small amount of land that is found in cities. We also need to break the centralization in the sense that if we have one seed bank, that one seed bank which has been destroyed by the occupation recently, we need to move away from centralization and build multiple seed banks across cities, cooperatives, farms, and villages. Which is similar to the seed bank that Mazen was speaking about earlier, the one that they started. And we also started a seed bank here in Ramallah, in the area of Ramallah, with seeds that were collected from farmers across the region, with 52 different seeds right now. And we're hoping that this effort is gonna spread to different regions other than Ramallah.
النقطة الثالثة أو الدرس الثالث، تعزيز الاقتصاد المنتج والمحلي مش ممكن ينجح بمعزل عن إعادة بناء وتقوية البنى السياسية والاقتصادية والمجتمعية الجماعية، وعلى رأسها الاتحادات الشعبية، النقابات، الأحزاب السياسية. فهذه الأطر كانت تشكل أساس الفعل الجماعي المنظم فترة الانتفاضة الأولى وقبلها. في مواجهة شو عم بيجري هلا أو جرى على مدار السنوات الماضية وتحديدا بعد الانتفاضة، محاولات لتفكيكها واستبدالها بصيغ بديلة مفروضة علينا من الخارج، مثل تعزيز دور العائلات على حساب الأحزاب على سبيل المثال أو القبائل، أو حصر العمل العام في مؤسسات المجتمع المدني أنجزت هذا المجتمع، بما يفرغ العمل السياسي والاجتماعي من مضمونه التحرري.
تعيد بس آخر نقطة هاي عن العائلات
يعني أهم بقول إنه لنعزز الاقتصاد المنتج، هذا كمان ما بينجح تعزيز الاقتصاد الإنتاجي أو المقاوم أو الصمود بمعزل عن إعادة بناء وتقوية البنى السياسية والاقتصادية والمجتمعية الجماعية، زي الاتحادات الشعبية، النقابات، الأحزاب السياسية، التعاونيات. هاي الأطر هي كانت تشكل أساس الفعل الجماعي والمنظم في فلسطين زي بالانتفاضة الأولى قبلها. في محاولة شو عم بيصير هلا أو شو صار على طول السنوات الماضية بعد الانتفاضة الأولى ومن أوسلو واطلع، جرى محاولات لتفكيك الأحزاب السياسية وإضعافها وإضعاف النقابات، واستبدالها مثلا على سبيل المثال بصيغ العائلات تصير تحكم بدل الأحزاب، زي ما دولة عشائر في الخليل زي ما بيطرحوا الإسرائيليين هلا على سبيل المثال، أو حصر العمل العام في مجال المؤسسات الأهلية فقط. وهذا كله بفرغ العمل السياسي والاجتماعي من مضمونه التحرري، بيروح في منظومة الاستهلاك والفردية وكل التصفيات الأخرى.
Okay. So in order to strengthen the communities and Palestinian society as a whole, the local economy needs to move towards a more developmental and productive state, and this doesn't come without a strengthening of the political, economical, and social communal fabric in Palestinian society, like the unions and the political parties, and the communal and the community, like the committees, the popular committees that Hania spoke about earlier. This is what made the First Intifada so successful. But after Oslo and what Mazen said in terms of how it took the wind out of the First Intifada, what they tried to do, the occupation, is to deconstruct the unions, to dissolve the unions, to dissolve the political parties, and take as much power as they can from them, and put the onus, I guess, or the responsibility of like political control to the families, and to take away to families such as like tribal families, such as what we see in Al Khalil, Hebron, um, and that way basically the benefits, the political benefits, start to get centralized into the hands of families, and families begin to become protective over these benefits, and so it kind of breaks the fabric of society and the Palestinian struggle. Or they also try to try to trap public work in civil institutions, which isn't necessarily the best way to do it, because we need public work to be more decentralized and more spread out across the communities. And therefore, when you do that, when you trap public work in civil institutions or in organizations, that leads to individualism and the liberalization of the economy, like individualism and consumerism.
النقطة الأخيرة واللي هي على المستوى القاعدة أو على المستوى الشعبي، واللي هي استمرار اللي حكى عنه أو تجربة اللجان الشعبية بالانتفاضة، إعادة كل مفهوم اللجان الشعبية، اللجان المجتمعية الجماعية، هذا بهذا الشكل الطوعي اللي اللجان المتطوع، الدكاترة، التعليم، الخدمات، الصحة إلى آخره. إعادة تفعيل هاي اللجان المجتمعية وتكون بشكل طوعي من القاعدة، من مكونات المجتمع بهاي القرية، هو يشكلها وفق احتياجاته وأولوياته، مش زي عم بصير هلا من ما يسمى لجان طوارئ أو لجان الحب بسموها أجهزة السلطة على الحواجز، اللي هي تشكل بمؤسسات أهلية أو وزارات ومربوطة بالتمويل الخارجي، وبتخضع للتنافس. أنا المؤسسة الفلانية عند اللجنة الفلانية، المؤسسة الفلانية عندها اللجنة الفلانية، بمعنى يعني تحويل هاي اللجان لطوارئ متنافسة ما بتعبر عن احتياج المجتمع ولا أولوياته الفعلية، بالعكس تضعف قدرته على الفعل الجماعي المستدام الموجود. فلازم نرجع لهاي التجربة اللي كانت بالانتفاضة الأولى. شكرا.
And the last point is, in order like to go back to popular committees such as the ones we saw in the First Intifada, that's made up of doctors, teachers, etc., and to reactivate those, we need to see more of a voluntary form in the communities, in the villages, from the people of that area themselves, meeting their needs and their personal requirements, rather than the things that we see right now that sprouts out of the PA, such as urgency delegations and delegations of love. ايش هم هذول لجنات الحب او لجان الحب؟
دول عشان الأجهزة الأمنية بتوقف على الحواجز، فعشان ما يعطوهم طابع إنه مشابهين للاحتلال فسموهم حواجز المحبة.
حواجز المحبة. Okay, so these delegations of love is a joking term that is being given to the security forces of the PA, who are standing on barriers that control transportation as well. And so it's like a way to joke about them, because they kind of are in coordination with the occupation and working against the national struggle of their people. And so instead of these urgency delegations that we're seeing, and these delegations that are in coordination with the occupation, that come from ministries or civil institutions or other organizations that are dependent on financial aid that's coming from the outside, not from Palestine or Palestinians themselves, it becomes more of a competitive nature between these different groups and delegations. I'm from delegation A, you're from delegation B, and everybody starts to kind of like identify with these different delegations rather than being all part of the same struggle and part of the same liberation movement that is trying to achieve the same objectives.
Thank you so much, Rami, and thank you, Adam, for the translation. It is really inspiring to hear about all the work that's going on the ground. And yeah, like some people said in the chat, some of the things that we're seeing in the West Bank, we're seeing around the world. And so I want to bring it to Kali. I know when we talked a couple weeks ago, you said that you were a student of the First Intifada, that you have learned a lot as an organizer. And so I would love to, hear you introduce yourself to everyone, and then B, I, want to hear about what you've learned from the First Intifada and how the cooperative structure has been instrumental in building economic sovereignty in the Southeast, especially in Black communities.
Um, that's a lot.
It's a lot, yeah.
I will do my best, but again, for everyone, my name is Kali Akuno, representing Cooperation Jackson, based out of Jackson, Mississippi. I guess let me try to contextualize the first part of the comment. As a child of family members who were in the radical wing of the Black Liberation Movement, the Intifada, the First Intifada, came at a pretty critical time of encouraging resistance in the face of a number of retreats and setbacks that were happening in the 1980s on a global scale. I mean, it was somewhat uneven, but there was, for instance, the U.S. invasion of Grenada, the assassination of Patrice Lumumba. Of Maurice Bishop, and the elimination of the New Jewel movement. There were just the string of coups d'etats that were happening on the African continent and other parts of Asia. There was the beginning of kind of the rollback and the economic retraction of first the Eastern Bloc, but also the struggles that were taking place very clearly at that time within the Soviet Union, which the early part of the next decade saw its both betrayal and kind of collapse. So if you paint a picture, like in the 60s and 70s, the national liberation movements were inspiring. They were encouraging, development and advances even inside the United States and Western Europe. But by the 1980s, a lot of the defeats, the reversals, the mistakes were kind of producing the opposites. And so, in 87, when the Intifada, emerges to the world, and you see, from my perspective, understanding the other asymmetry between the Palestinians and the United States and the Zionists on the other hand, and to see just the level of resistance, that was deeply, deeply inspiring to me, that even under some of the most, adverse conditions, people's spirit was not broken, and folks were finding ways to resist even within the limitations that were imposed. And so really trying to study, how were people finding ways to do basic things, relative to our conversation. How were they finding ways to feed themselves, right? to resource themselves, to be able to turn up and turn out and to protest, to resist, to boycott, to all those different things. There were some profound lessons that, because I had the parents I had and the movement I had, was trying to pay clear detail too, to figure out how are they doing this under these particular conditions, to be able to affect a shift in the narrative, but more importantly, a shift in the material world. Um, and even though, the First Intifada did not lead to the liberation of Palestine, it did change some of the equations, and we can debate whether those were good or bad. I'm talking about the Oslo Accords in particular. In my personal view, that they wind up being a trap. I don't think that's what their framers had in mind, but in terms of how the forces of capital and the imperialists kind of structured the world system and all the rules and the movements of goods and resources and people, and wind up being very much a trap and pretty much put a section of the Palestinian movement, at least in my view, in a position of being a watchdog over its own people. And I cite that because, not to the same extent or to the same degree, that also happened to us during that same period of time in the 1980s and 90s. So it is by no accident in particular that if you look at the massive explosion of the prison population in the United States, with a totally disproportion of that explosion being Black people, particularly young Black men in the 80s and 90s, um, that happens at kind of the height of Black mayors in particular being in power over the same cities that were being raided, and the level of collaboration they had with the federal government and all the repressive institutions, and criminalizing really poverty and the dire economic straits that large parts of the Black working class kind of found itself in, and was trying to make ends meet through a number of different means. So drawing a lot of, like both parallels and things of like, it's not our same context, but we could use some of that here, to deal with the repressive conditions in the repressive context. So that is not just the inspiration, but also kind of looking at the strategies and tactics that were employed by the Palestinian forces at that time, kind of to meet the challenge is a critical thing that at least me personally have always tried to bring to the work. And I would say, help to shape a lot of the things that we have tried to accomplish here in Jackson. Now, getting to that particular point, I don't want to have anyone have any illusion that we have gotten anywhere remotely near actually attaining economic, self-determination or sovereignty in Jackson, Mississippi, and the Black community. We, I think, have helped to shift some aspects of the narrative. I think we have helped to politicize a significant portion of the population in the best of times. But there's a long way to go, and a hard road to climb to get where we are ultimately trying to go. And we are now facing even more adverse conditions than we did when we started roughly in 2014. Um, you know, uh, we have tried to develop a program, and emphasis on the try. We were It's going to be tested to see to what degree it will actually kind of get us over the hump of the next couple of years, as Trump and his allies really tighten the screws on the U.S. economy, to really affect more discipline on the U.S. working class, and getting all sections of the U.S. working class to accept a declining standard of living as one of the primary objectives of what they're trying to accomplish, and for them to really try to be competitive once again in the economic plane, particularly with China, in order for the automation, the re-automation, the reindustrialization program that they're trying to institute If they're trying to incorporate U.S. labor into that and have it be competitive, that means wages of U.S. workers have to go down dramatically, and working conditions of U.S. workers have to go down dramatically. Otherwise, all these factories that they're talking about, the automobile factories, we know those will be fully automated. They will not employ that many humans. But then there's a big question, which the U.S. economy right now is really beginning to deal with. There's going to be a major challenge in the future around the shift that is likely to come. It's not inevitable, but it's likely to come on account of AI. Is how do you where's the consumer base? If there's people who don't have jobs, how are they going to buy all these products that Amazon is selling or whoever is selling when they don't have income? And you see that with consumer, spending falling flat increasingly, etc. I can go on about that, but the piece that we've tried to introduce, we call it kind of the build and fight formula, and is trying to scaffold a series of practices to be able to do a level of autonomous production at scale in a local municipal community to be able to fight back when they, shut down the jobs, when they do like they did with SNAP, which is use food as a weapon, because that's effectively what just happened and what we all basically, witness and experience. That is only going to continue. Um, and we try to build a program around that. It is still, I would say, in its infant stages to see if it's really going to work in practice. I think the hardest challenge, and then I'll stop. I think the hardest challenge is what was asked around the neoliberal conditioning, and have we been able to really break that? I would say our best evidence to say that it we've at least set up some dynamics to challenge it come from the experience we had during the pandemic, where there was a heavy degree on a local level, but also I would argue to a national level, where mutual aid work really expanded significantly, and people were able to meet certain challenges both in Jackson and elsewhere. What we have not seen, I think, to a sufficient enough degree, even though like we're doing autonomous food production, there's a host of other community gardens and projects, throughout the city, and I would say throughout the country. What we have not seen, either in Jackson or elsewhere, to at least to my knowledge, which I think is the next stage, is all the local food producers working together to develop a plan on how to meet the needs of our communities. That's the next step is the coordination and the planning to be able to execute that. But it's going to be a challenge because um, neoliberalism as a political project and as a cultural set of conditioning, we have to recognize has done a damn good job of individuating society, particularly in the United States, in a really profound way, and it's only gotten worse with the advent of social media and how that has isolated people and make them even more individuated and into their phones. And so we have to figure out ways of how we step up, bringing people back together in the community and building common bonds. And I think that's going to be our challenge, a major challenge for the U.S. movement in particular in 2026 as economic conditions continue to worsen, the political repression intensifies. So we have some major challenging days ahead, no matter how you slice it.
Thanks, Kali. Yeah, I think there's a lot of, the big sort of thread, joining thread here is the importance of coming together and like building those mutual aid systems and pushing back against neoliberalism, individualism, and there's so many lessons from the First Intifada that we can pull from for like our current context in the US, in the West Bank, in the UK, which we're going to hear a little bit more about that soon. So I appreciate that. And there's going to be time for questions. There's been some interesting discussion in the chat. So hold your questions to the end. But I want to bring it over to Martin. Uh, First, I want to hear you introduce yourself, but I um, want to turn the discussion more around labor and worker cooperatives. We've talked about popular committees, but I want to hear more about labor organizing and the importance of international worker and cooperative solidarity with the Palestinian struggle. And so, um, yeah, I'll turn it to you.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. It's a real honor to be part of this panel. So I'm Martin Flaherty. I'm Irish but live and work in the UK. Um, I'm a member of Infinity Foods Workers Cooperative. We're one of the largest and the oldest cooperatives in the UK, and like several others around the UK worker cooperatives, we work in we're whole foods wholesalers, particularly with regard to sustainable, ethically sourced, largely organic produce. Within my co-op, I've helped to set up and run our weekly food redistribution scheme to the economically marginalized. I'm also on the team that administrates, we have a solidarity fund where we administer grants um, nationally and internationally. Uh, Outside of work, I'm a long-time activist and organizer for Palestine Solidarity in Ireland and the UK. So I was, really inspired to come across the Palestinian Social Fund and to hear of cooperatives forming a basis of resistance within Palestine. With regard to the sort of the history of class struggle and cooperatives in the UK, the origin, as opposed to the forms that we share of the modern cooperative that came about, I think, roughly around the mid 19th century in response to the conditions, the poverty that accompanied the Industrial Revolution. The Rochdale pioneers established a cooperative shop, and that's where they instituted the sort of principles that we all share about fair pricing, about sharing profits, and about accountability and the importance of community. That grew in the 19th century and spread and became, quite widespread within the UK. The residue of that movement still exists today in the cooperative group, which is enormous. It's a consumer cooperative, which has, I think, something like £11 billion turnover. But the fact that it is a consumer cooperative means it's, quite limited in terms of its impact and its capacity for, bringing about real change. And that does reflect the limitations that were around, broadly speaking, in the consumer cooperative movement in the UK in the 19th century. The more radical element has been the worker cooperatives, which had a bit of a revival in the 1960s, and there's several like my own, which are all in the food sector. Coincidentally, they came about through a sort of shared awareness coming out of the 1960s of the injustice of sort of social relations, well, particularly international trade. And so that's sort of at the core of how we view cooperation and cooperativism. So the ideas of social responsibility and accountability and economic justice are really, really key to what we do. We've got a flat pay structure whereby our IT person has the same wage as our cleaner. We have one member, one vote. We have no managers, no bosses, no external shareholders. And if you were to tell people that, I think they would, their sort of knee-jerk response would be to say, well, that's unsustainable or over the long term. But, both our cooperative and other worker cooperatives around the UK prove it really is sustainable. Where there's over 100 of us in other similar cooperatives, workers cooperatives, there's up to 300. And this offers a huge amount of opportunities that don't exist in other workplaces for organizing and for making the principle of, principle 6, the cooperative principle, the cooperation between cooperatives, and the importance of solidarity at the community level, at the national level, and at the international level. It means that we can really enact that the spaces that we have as a democratic workers cooperatives mean that, for instance, with regard to Palestine, you can bring forward your proposal to the workplace, argue for showing solidarity with Palestine, and in that democratic forum, you would be, quite surprised in a similar way to how a jury trial operates, when people get to hear the full extent of the injustice in Palestine. The response is, quite extraordinary compared to the general public. So yeah, that's worker cooperatives in the UK. Yeah.
Thanks, Martin. That was, um, yeah, it's again like really inspiring to hear about all the work that Infinity has done, both in the UK but also to support liberation struggles, especially in Palestine. I know that you've been um, a big supporter of the PSF for a while, and we're really excited to continue working together. And um, I I'm gonna transition to the last question. I want to make sure we still have time for audience questions. Um, but I guess to, close out, I think um, bringing it back to Palestine, I think there's this tendency in the international community towards defeatism. People sometimes think that the occupation is too superior, and that the occupation destroys everything that Palestinians build. Um, and so a lot of people in their international community support more topical aid, which is still important. Beside, and they don't support long-term liberationist infrastructure because there is this sense that the occupation is going to destroy it. And so, how can we challenge this notion within the international community and get more people to support this developmental and liberationist type of work that's happening in Palestine? And I will pass it first to Rami and Adam, and then I'll pass it to Mazen to close out.
رامي لساتك
شكرا هانيا. هو سؤال حساس، يعني حساس ومستفز بنفس الوقت. طيب، هو بشكل عام في توجه دولي قديم جديد دائما بيسعى لأنه تضلها فلسطين قضية إنسانية إغاثية ومش قضية سياسية تحررية.
Okay. So this question is both sensitive and irritating. There's a general direction that usually tries to take the Palestinian struggle towards more of a humanitarian struggle, as if the Palestinians are just a troubled people, rather than a struggle for liberation that is under occupation, people under occupation, and people that are facing an injustice, a political struggle, basically.
يعني بيعملوا على يحسنوا ظروف الفلسطينيين اقتصاديا ومعيشيا، ولكن ضمن واقع استمرار الاحتلال مش إنهائه.
So they try to improve Palestinian life, both economically, mostly economically, still within the context of the occupation, but not to end the occupation.
وهذا الشيء بيصير عبر سياسات اقتصادية وبرامج تعزز هذا الواقع وبتدخل أجندات خارجية ما بتمثل أولوية في السياق الفلسطيني، بل بتخدم استدامة السيطرة بدل تفكيكها.
So this happens through different policies and programs um, that are organized mostly from the outside, that come in with prioritization of maintaining the occupation rather than actually deconstructing it and dissolving it.
والدعم المالي المنفصل عن أي التزام سياسي حقيقي هو هذا النهج اللي بتعتمده غالبية الجهات المانحة الرأسمالية، واللي بيعتمد في جوهره دعم ما ينسجم مع سياسات الاحتلال واستمراره. فالدعم المطلوب مش دعم تقني أو إغاثي بالرغم من أهميته زي ما حكيته، بل دعم يعني يكون مبني على حق سياسي بطالب بإنهاء الاحتلال وتحرير الأرض وضمان الحقوق للشعب الفلسطيني. ومن الأمثلة المهمة على ذلك صمت المجتمع الدولي والمؤسسات الدولية لما الاحتلال يقوم بهدم منشآت زراعية أو إنتاجية أو صناعية أصلا ممولة من حكومات غربية. فالسؤال الجوهري أو الرئيسي بهاي
استنى
أوكي.
متأسف بس بعرف سلسلة الأفكار عم تمشي. And so the financial support that usually comes in from the outside it tries to depoliticize the Palestinian struggle and make sure that any side that actually receives the money is aligned, or its work is actually aligned with the policies and the continuation of the occupation. And so there's the support rather than coming in for it comes in for that rather than for coming in for the justice and the politicization of the Palestinian cause, and for people that are trying to break free from an occupation. And a main example of this is the silence of international organizations after the destruction of agricultural institutions such as the seed bank and other things that were built by financial support that comes from the outside. The international organizations kind of turn a blind eye to that, even though outside money and their own money it was used to fund the operations and the structure that were built that were destroyed by the occupation.
فهو هذا الصمت آدم بشكل أساسي وعدم محاسبة الاحتلال ومساءلته هو اللي بشجع، بدون ما يكون في موقف سياسي قوي ومساءلة فعلية، هو اللي بشجع الاحتلال وبجرأه على إنه يستمر بسياسة هدم هاي المشاريع أو المنشآت الزراعية.
So this very silence and this lack of a political stance against the occupation when it does things like this is what actually motivates it and makes it conducive for the occupation to continuously destroy the structures that Palestinians try to build for themselves.
وما تخافوا علينا وما تخافوا على الدعم، لأن النضال الفلسطيني ضد الاحتلال هو أصلا مستمر من أكثر من 100 عام، وخلال هاي المسيرة الطويلة الشعب الفلسطيني بنى بنفسه مقومات صموده على أرضه. وصحيح إنه الاحتلال هدم يعني مئات ويمكن أكثر من المشاريع والمنشآت على يعني عمر السنين، لكن الفلسطينيين في المقابل يعني أعيدوا بناء عشرات الآلاف، وأسهمت في تعزيز صمودهم وتمسكهم بأرضهم رغم كل المحاولات الاقتلاع والتهجير على مدار السنوات الماضية.
So don't worry about us. Is the main message. The Palestinian struggle has been alive for more than 100 years, whether it's the British mandate under the British occupiers or the current occupation. And the Palestinians built their own forms of sumud, of steadfastness, and whether the occupation was able to, even though the occupation was able to destroy hundreds, if not more, of Palestinian operations and structures, we've been able to reconstruct tens of thousands of these structures that help our communities. And even in the wake of now I'm going to improvise a little bit, but it's still the same. Even in the wake of mass imprisonment in dislodging of tens of thousands of olive trees. The Palestinians continuously replant, reconstruct, and continue the fight for liberation.
وبالتأكيد الاحتلال يعني بشكل ممنهج بيستهدف هذا التدمير للمنشآت الإنتاجية والزراعية والصناعية، لأنه بيدرك أنه وجود اقتصاد وطني مقاوم بشكل أحد أعمدة التحرر الفلسطيني. فالهدف هو إبقاء الاقتصاد الفلسطيني اقتصاد تابع ريعي خاضع لسيطرة الاحتلال، يتحكم الاحتلال بكل مفاصله. فبالتالي كيف بدنا نحكي عن استقلال سياسي دون ما يكون في استقلال اقتصادي حقيقي؟ فإذا التمويل الخارجي بده يكون إغاثي، وين بده يصب بهاي الخانة في حالة حصار الاحتلال واغلاق الحدود والتجويع زي ما حدث في غزة؟ ايش بده يفيد اذا ما كانش في انتاج محلي قادرين الناس يصمدوا في ظل هذا سياسة التجويع اللي عم بتصير؟
So the occupation takes it upon itself to target production hubs, agriculture and manufacturing that is owned by Palestinians, because it knows that in order, these things build economic resistance for the Palestinians, and economic resistance itself is a tenet for the Palestinian struggle in order to reach and achieve liberation. So it makes sure to break any economic development for the Palestinians that is owned by the Palestinians. And it makes sure that the economy is captive and dependent on outside aid, and they control everything that comes in and out of it. Like what is financial support when it just comes in? Actually ممكن تعيد آخر نقطة؟ أنا لما حكيت
ايش فائدة الدعم الإغاثي راح يكون؟ ايش راح تكون فائدة الدعم الإغاثي في ظل انه الاحتلال مغلق الحدود وبيمنع ادخال المساعدات، وشفنا التجويع، الناس ماتت بغزة لأشهر طويلة. ايش فائدة هذا الدعم في مقابل انه كيف لما انت تزرع وتلاقى على الأقل جنب بيتك او يعني.
Yeah. So the main question to ask ourselves is, what is the purpose of financial support when the occupation, we saw what they did in Gaza. They besieged the entire population. They prevented any entry of aid, any entry of food. They systemized hunger against the Gazan population, rather than financial support that could come in and actually allow people to plant and have the land actually sustain them in the wake of the occupation's violence and aggression.
من هون الرهان بيكون على هذا التمويل المجتمعي الحر زي ما بيشتغل الصندوق الاجتماعي، مش على تمويل الحكومات والأدوات المؤسساتية الرأسمالية اللي بتتماهى مع سياسات الاحتلال. يعني لما الاحتلال يمنع البناء أو التطوير، يعلن عن مشاريع، يعني يمنع الاحتلال أو التطوير أو في مناطق جيم أو سي حسب اتفاق أوسلو، بنشوف كثير من الممولين بيسارعوا لشطب دعم المشاريع في هاي المناطق، بدل إنه بيتماشوا معه، بدل ما يضغطوا عليه ويمارسوا الضغط السياسي والقانوني إنه لا لازم يشتغلوا في سي، لأن هاي سي أراضي فلسطينية حسب على الأقل القانون الدولي واللي بيعترفوا فيه هم يعني.
So the bet is on financial support. The bet should be on financial support that comes in for developmental purposes, rather than for topical aid or humanitarian purposes. Although that's we always reiterate that that's still important, but obviously the liberationist support or developmental capital is underserved. عيد نقطتك الثانية، النص الثاني عن جيم، عن منطقة جيم.
يعني الاحتلال حاليا عم بيمارس سياسة بمنع البناء أو تنفيذ مشاريع أو بناء منشآت زراعية أو صناعية في أراضي جيم أو سي اللي هي مصنفة حتى باتفاق أوسلو فلسطينية. المؤسسات الدولية شو بتعمل؟ بتتماشى مع سياسته وبتلغي كل المشاريع إنه المفروض بنائها أو دعمها في أراضي سي، وبتحولها إحنا لا لازم نشتغل في أراضي بي و A. شوف يعني كيف تتماشى مع أي سياسي بدل ما أصلا لازم تمارس الضغط عليه. وحسب القانون الدولي هاي معترف فيها، فبالتالي لازم تجبره إنه يشتغل فيها. هي بتهرب وبتتماشى مع سياسته.
So the occupation tends makes sure or to target any project that happens in Area C in the West Bank, which is meant to be
بتشكل
under Palestinian.
70% من مساحة الضفة الغربية كمان. هذا مهم. 60% بتشكل Area C.
منطقة C. Area C, which is meant to be under Palestinian control, which makes up about 60 to 70% of the West Bank, although still under the occupation and the control of the occupation. And so when the fact that the occupation targets any project, any developmental project, whether it's agricultural or productive in Area C, international organizations, when they come and they want to support Palestinian projects, they align with the policies of the occupation and tend to move away from projects that exist under Area C rather than actually forcing the occupation to accept the development of these projects under Area C. But rather they start to go to say, let's actually move to Area B and Area A, which under international law, or not under international law, I mean, is more under the Oslo Agreement, is more under the control of the occupation. So from a legal standpoint, but not necessarily legal because that's all been dissolved. Area A and B are meant to be under occupation. And one of them is under coordination with the PA, and Area C is meant to be fully Palestinian controlled. But that's not the case. And so rather than using international law in order to force the occupation to stand down and allow projects to develop in Area C, these international organizations just align with the occupation and try to move their funds to Area B and Area A.
وآخر نقطتين سريعا، إنه عدم زراعة الأرض أو تركها فارغة معناها تسليمها للاحتلال، لأنه الأرض المتروكة بيستغل الاحتلال قوانين استعمارية قديمة من الفترة البريطانية والعثمانية باعتبارها أملاك دولة، وبالتالي سهل السيطرة عليها. أما الأراضي المزروعة بيكون في يعني معركة حواليها، مش بهاي السهولة يسهل ضمها.
Yeah. So the last 2 points, an empty land, land that is not cultivated means it's a land for the occupation to steal. And the occupation takes steps from uses tactics from previous imperialist ventures in the region, such as any land that is not cultivated, and this also happened under the Ottomans. Any land that is not cultivated or that is not used is just owned by the entity in power or the country in power. And so if you don't actually cultivate the land, it's you're basically making it more prone to be stolen.
آخر شيء، الشعب الفلسطيني قدم مئات الآلاف من الشهداء والجرحى والأسرى على مدار سنوات النضال، وفيش إشي أغلى من الإنسان ودمه. والحرية لا تنتزع دون تضحيات وأثمان باهظة. خسارة منشآت أو خسائر مادية ما بتتقارن بخسارة الإنسان وحياة البشر. فهاي نضال طويل ومستمر يا آدم، ومش ممكن نيأس ومش ممكن نهاجر، وراح نضلنا نبني ونزرع ونعمل من أجل تحرير فلسطين. ومن آمن إنه زراعة كل متر من الأرض هو خطوة إضافية نحو تحريرها. وبدعمكم المجتمعي لفلسطين بهذا النهج التنموي لزراعة الأرض والتعاونيات والمقاومة هو بحرر أراضي جديدة عبر استصلاحها وزراعتها. شكرا.
And the last point is that the Palestinian struggle has given hundreds of thousands of martyrs, prisoners, and injured. But nothing is greater than our blood and our dignity. We will continue to fight, and we will continue to rebuild. And we will continue to farm every inch of that land, and every inch that we farm is a step towards liberation. And your support and the support of both Arabs, Palestinians abroad, and friends of and allies of the Palestinian struggle is for the cooperatives, allows for the returning to the land and making sure that we protect it, and we finally build towards liberation once and for all. And thank you.
Thank you, Rami. I, really have nothing to add. I think I just want to reiterate the role of the diaspora, for Palestinians like me in supporting these projects, and the historic role in that we've had in supporting these projects. But I'll pass it on to Mazen to close out if you have anything else you want to add.
يعطيك العافية رامي. أبدعت يعني، ومهم الحكي اللي حكيته. إن شاء الله لازم نتواصل أنا وياك. Really thank Rami for what he said. It's precisely what needs to be said about these things. We have, of course, our challenge is huge, but as Rami said, we have been on this land and we continue to struggle. When the Balfour Declaration was issued in 1917, there were about 900,000 Palestinians in Palestine, or less than that even. Now there is about 7.2 million Palestinians living between the river and the sea, and another 7-point-something million Palestinians outside the country. So we're total nearly 15 million Palestinians. 8.5 million of us are refugees or displaced people. And so even the ones like me and Rami and others that are still here, of course, we live in these shrinking ghettos, if you want, and occasionally there's a like the Gaza ghetto uprising. Uprisings happen frequently and will continue if there's no liberation forthcoming. I am optimistic that liberation is coming. The real question for us all is, how do we direct our efforts? What is it that we need to do as individuals, as people concerned? Now, the only minor issue I take with is, don't worry about us Palestinians. Canary in the mine, we're the Achilles heel of much more than even South Africa was under apartheid, where the West supported apartheid, later claimed they didn't support apartheid, but they supported apartheid. The Western governments certainly support this apartheid, genocidal, ethnic cleansing regime, while talking about human rights and international law occasionally when it serves their interests, like, about human rights for dictatorships that they don't like, but for dictatorships they like Saudi Arabia or United Arab Emirates, or one of those other genocidal regimes like the UAE engaged in genocide in the Sudan now. Then that's okay. This hypocrisy, this Western hypocrisy, is exposed via Palestine. And hence, Palestine is not a Palestinian issue. It's a global issue. It's an issue of global ramifications. And if we allow the genocidal regime to continue like this, supported by United States, France, England, Germany, Italy now, and many countries they support it, then might as well forget about international law and human rights and it will be the law of the jungle, as they say. But although as a biologist, I don't like this term, because in jungle you never see the kind of butchery and the kind of savageness that is seen by humans against fellow humans. As I said, even when children are shot straight in the head, point blank, and prisoners are tortured and raped, and including young boys, etc. This is the worst crimes of the Nazis. The Nazis never stopped a whole territory where they besieged it and starved it and destroyed all its residential buildings, or most of them, 97% of residential buildings, 94% of all tree cover, 98% of habitats of endangered species in the Gaza Strip. The Nazis never did any of this stuff. The Nazis were, did some other things, but that's certainly not something they engaged in. And not only that, the Nazis were ashamed of what they did. These monsters that we are facing are very proud of what they are doing. They're actually bragging about killing and torturing prisoners and stuff like that. So if we allow them, if the world allows this to continue, then the Western world is doomed, and we already see it being doomed with the rise of BRICS countries and the decline of America. Thanks to Donald Trump for accelerating this decline. But anyways, so Palestine is a global issue. It's not a local issue, I think, and that's why you see Palestinian flags everywhere around the world. Now, to bring it back locally to us Palestinians living here, I mean, I had a conference just this weekend in Ramallah where we talked about one democratic state. And of course, we are being attacked not just by the Israelis and the Americans and many other governments that bought into this foolish mythology of a so-called two-state solution, which is a two-state delusion and illusion and propaganda and mirage effort. But even the Palestinian Authority is attacking us. So we really have to do a lot of planning, and I would love to, and Kari and Martin and others and Adam, so that we can think together and develop our strategies. We're developing actually a think tank now as a result of a conference we had in Ramallah. So we really need to develop our processes, and this conversation that you've had is a good conversation to open up a lot of things. Like, for example, what Rami mentioned about how do you actually go about, getting this European and other aid to be actually liberatory aid. This sounds like a pie in the sky to try and convince them. I actually succeeded in some, which I can tell you about, but not on a public talk like this. You can find ways around the system and even use the system for our liberation advantage. But you have to be very very smart about it and very well connected to the system, and find sympathetic people within the mechanisms created by the European Union and others, which, as you pointed out, mechanisms that are intended to relieve their conscience by throwing a little bit of money at the Palestinians, while at the same time supporting genocide and supporting Israel The EU, for example, gives $600 million to Israel for quote unquote research and development, which is mostly about research and development of weapons. How do we do that? How do we leverage boycott, divestment, sanctions in a good way? All of these things are topics that require much more than a conversation. Some people are engaged in it. I can tell you hundreds of names, but collecting a database of some important conversations, including on issues like cooperatives. I noticed in the chat room there are some questions about cooperatives and leveraging cooperatives in the light of the socio-political structures that we inherited, we did not choose. How do you do this? What do you do with it? I wrote a paper on mental liberation from mental colonization, which is an important aspect of this. Of course, physical colonization is not as bad as mental colonization. As you recall, in the slavery period, there were house slaves and field slaves, and they differ in their approaches to the problem, if you want. There is also mental colonization of the colonizers themselves. And how do we help them? How do we help them to basically treat them from this illness of racism and colonialism and greed and stupidity that's ultimately is actually to their disadvantage long term. Many of them do not realize this. For example, many people in Tel Aviv, they don't realize that the actions of their government that resulted in sewage water being dumped into the Mediterranean from the Gaza Strip goes upstream, and they're literally swimming in the shit of Gaza in places like Tel Aviv and Jaffa. These are things you have to educate people about. You have to show them how their governments and their people in power. Ultimately, we have a struggle with people in power. And if you read books like Edward Said's Orientalism or Howard Zinn's book on people's history, many, many books, Franz Fanon, The Wretched of the Earth, they give you a lot of ideas about how you can struggle within the context of a huge power imbalance that we have. And this requires a lot of work, a lot of thinking, certainly much longer than the time we have in this session. So I'll stop here. Sorry, I answered long.
No, thank you, Mazen. It was all really important for us to hear. And I think these are things we hear often. They go in one ear and go out the other ear, and so it's important that you reiterated all of that to everyone. And the paper that you talked about, I think someone put in the chat. Thanks, Alia. And I can make sure to link it in the email with the recording after this event. I know we're a little over time, and so if any of the panelists, I just want to ask if it's okay if we stay on for like 15 more minutes to get some questions from the audience, but if you have to go, that's also fine. Cool. So I want to open it up to the audience. I think it would be best if we could either do hand raising, or if folks could put their questions in the chat, and we'll try to get to at least 3 before we close out for today. Mason?
Hi, all. Thank you so much for that really excellent discussion. I had a two-part question for Rami and Mazen. And in the First Intifada, cooperatives were this essential part of the uprising's power, but I think that's also because they were woven into this larger structure of grassroots popular democracy. So it wasn't just an economic, but also a political counterpower against the occupation. And I'm wondering, given all that's happening with the current cooperative movement in Palestine, what prospects you see for the resurrection of something like the popular committees today to play that role. And then second, I'm just curious what discussions are happening in the national movement within the occupation about the other liberation struggle in the region that in the same way is rooted in grassroots community institutions of self-governance and cooperativizing the economy, and that being the revolution in Rojava and the Kurdish freedom movement. Just curious what your thoughts are on those.
Maybe we can have, I don't know if Adam is still on, if you want to translate the question first.
Yes. Mason, I think let's take all three questions or all the questions that we want to take. Mason, can you share it in the comments
Yes.
as we take the other questions? Thank you.
Okay. We'll take Howard's and then Laura, but let's make sure to keep it short so we can get to everyone's questions.
Yeah, thank you everyone for this incredible forum. So my question is both for the people here from the global north who spoke, as well as the Palestinians. I think that the way that the cooperatives, in terms of taking land back or containing the land that people already have in the West Bank is essential for the liberation of Palestine, but particularly in the global north. Cooperatives, thousands and thousands of them coexist with capitalism, from Madagon to smaller ones. And the question is not just mutual aid. The question is mutual aid and solidarity to build a revolutionary movement against the state by using cooperatives, not just to have an alternative economy. So that question is for everybody, but in particular for the people from the global north who spoke on the forum. Thank you.
Cool. And last one from Laura.
Hi. So yeah, really amazing panel, super informative, and I have not heard these perspectives elsewhere. So thank you. So my question has to do with the question of dual power and how that would be built in a situation like this, where it is a population living under permanent occupation of foreign power and foreign military. Because the way that dual power functions in countries that are not dealing with that, as I understand it, is that the communities are building sort of a life support system and an economic system based on solidarity, and so that allows the people in that society to divest from their dependency on the government and the corporations, because their needs can be met by the community. But I am wondering how that would play out in a situation like Palestine, where it's not like a dependency issue, it's an invasion and occupation issue. And obviously, building a solidarity economy is allowing the Palestinians to resist simply by being able to survive, which is an act of resistance in and of itself against Israeli colonization. And also, I know that you just mentioned that the using the land is resistance because that makes it less likely to claim. But I'm wondering about the other aspects of a dual power challenge. Can that work in a situation, or how would that work in a situation like this, as opposed to something where there's this sort of mutual dependency where the people are dependent on the government and the corporations for jobs and consumer products, and the government and the corporations are dependent on the people for their tax dollars, support, consumer dollars, and labor.
Thanks, Laura. I am going to combine your question with Mason's because I think they're similar. And just for time's sake, But let's go to Kali and Martin for the question about cooperatives in the global north. That way, Adam has a little bit more time to translate. If either of you want to take this question.
I thought we might have run out of time, so I was while you were saying that I put a little bit in the chat. Um,
I think you're muted.
Cooperatives for cooperative's sake are dead end, in my view. They have to be, I would argue, seen as instruments of the working class, self-organizing instruments of the working class, and they need to work with all, workers to try to transform production and then transform society. And so that means, not just accepting the pre-existing spaces that are organized, by capital to produce commodities that we just kind of leave them be. It is incumbent upon us to try to organize all those who work in every factory institution to try to transform those institutions, either by unionizing or turning those into worker-owned and controlled institutions that serve a social function and produce for society as opposed to producing for consumer markets. That is going to entail a repivot a lot about how we do and build cooperatives and what the cooperatives are aimed to serve. Because if you go and look at most cooperative training or manuals and orientations, they are largely pitched as just another way of setting up a business establishment, and not as something that is an instrument of the working class to serve a broader social transformative need. So we have to pose these in a different way to get the answers that we want and ultimately build the movement that we need to get where I think at least those of us in this audience want to go. That's my answer in short.
Hi, shall I add to that? Yeah, you totally agree with what Callie had to say. In terms of the limitations of cooperatives in the global north, I think what's lacking really is an anti-imperial analysis. There is a class analysis, but not an anti-imperial analysis. And I think this is exemplified if you look at the statement of the International Cooperative Alliance in late October 2023, so 3 weeks into the genocide. It was full of terms like both sides and all sides need to come to the table. What was completely absent from it was any mention of occupation, any mention of apartheid, or any mention of genocide. And the lack of solidarity inherent in that statement at that time, I think is actually shows the amount of work that needs to be done to get to a space where international solidarity is a real thing rather than just a phrase that's thrown around like another empty corporate slogan. So yeah, a lot of work to be done. Yeah.
Thanks, Martin. I'll pass it to Adam to revisit Mason and Laura's joint question, which Mason typed out in the chat.
Okay. So this is for Mazen and Rami. If you have anything to say about this question. Rami, سمعت السؤال ولا أعيد لك إياه بالعربي؟ Muted.
لو سمحت سريعا ادم بقول.
خلاص. يقول السؤال: في الانتفاضة الأولى التعاونيات كانوا جزء أساسي من يعني القوة الشعبية، ولأنهم كانوا جزء يعني كانوا مربوطين بالأرض وبال يعني اللجان الشعبية اللي كانوا مؤسسين هذاك الوقت. فما كانوا بس يعني اقتصاديين، بس كانوا لهم طابع سياسي ليناهض الاحتلال. ف للحراك التعاوني هلا في فلسطين، عم بسأل ميسن انه ايش ممكن يعيد انشاء هذه اللجان الشعبية أو دورها نفس الطريق، يعني بطريقة ما نفس دور اللجان الشعبية اللي لعبتها بالانتفاضة الأولى. وسؤاله الثاني عن إذا في أي نقاشات داخل الحركة الوطنية أو في فلسطين عن الحركات التحررية الثانية في المنطقة، مثل بالحكم يعني اللي بيجربوا يشكلوا حالهم بحكم ذاتي، مثل الروجافا والأكراد.
أجاوب أنا
ابدأ.
أكيد. طيب، بتفق مع المقدمة للسؤال أو مقدمة ما قبل السؤال. هي التعاونيات كانت جزء من هذا الحراك الوطني السياسي الاقتصادي الاجتماعي، عشان هيك تم استهدافها من قبل الاحتلال. فكان حكى مازن عن تجربة 18 بقرة في بيت سحور، وكيف الاحتلال قعد أشهر هو عم بلاحق أو بدور على هاي الأبقار من بيت لبيت على سبيل المثال، حتى يضرب هاي البنية الجماعية اللي قدرت تعزز صمود الناس في فترة إضراب أو عصيان مدني طويل. كمان كان يمنع ترخيصها، يتدخل في أسماء الأشخاص الموجودة وإلى آخره من هاي الممارسات. ومع قدوم السلطة الفلسطينية وتبني نظام السوق الحر والى آخره، كمان هذا ساهم في إضعاف الحركة الوطنية بشكل عام، ومن ضمنها بالتأكيد الحركة التعاونية في فلسطين. شو عم نعمل هلا؟
أعطيني بس ثاني. So obviously, because the popular committees in the First Intifada were so threatening to the occupation, they were targeted, and it was an active effort to destroy every type of effort that went in that direction, such as what we saw when Mazen mentioned about the 18 cows in Beit Sahur. The actual documentary or film was put in the comments. So these 18 cows, they created an operation in order to go house to house in order to find where these cows were hidden. So this is the type of efforts and extents that they go to in order to destroy communal infrastructure that gives community strength to the Palestinian people. And obviously also after the PA came in, that has also kind of like centralized power and diminished the work of the communal work and the work of cooperatives as well.
التمويل الخارجي للمؤسسات هو كمان ساهم في تشويه هاي التعاونيات، بمعنى صار يتم بنائها على مش على أسس تعاونية صلبة بقدر ما هو يلا في تمويل يلا ناخد مشروع ما، وبالتالي وعلى ممارسات إدارية ومالية ضعيفة، فبالتالي سبب في فشل كثير من هاي التجارب التعاونية. Okay.
Thank you. So, and obviously outside financial help that started to come into Palestine in great number and great quantities, mainly after Oslo, tarnished or kind of like ruined cooperativism, because co-ops also date back to the early 20s in Palestine and are also ingrained in the culture of Palestinians. So how it tarnished these cooperatives is that money that was coming from the outside that was meant for cooperatives, people would just create cooperatives for the sake of taking that money. And so let's just make a cooperative in order to get financial support and take that grant. And that obviously, when you create a cooperative without the moral standings of how to build a cooperative, how to administer a cooperative, how to make it scale as a cooperative and not lose its moral framework and its national objectives, it made a lot of cooperatives fail in that front and just kind of tarnish the name of cooperativism as a whole.
ومع السياسات الاقتصادية يعني الاحتلال من جهة، والسياسات الاقتصادية الحكومة الفلسطينية وغيرها، هي بمعنى ما بعد أوسلو صار في سلخ للإنسان الفلسطيني عن أرضه، وصار الشاب الفلسطيني يفكر ب... بفردانيته، ويفكر بيحلم في وظيفة، لأنه هيك المعيشة صارت استهلاكية أو نظام استهلاكي. فكان هذا التحدي كبير قدامنا، كيف نعيد بناء هاي الهوية التعاونية، وكيف نقنع جيل من الشباب الصغار اللي خريجين الجامعات اللي تم عزلهم عن أرضهم وحطهم في قالب استهلاكي، لنقدر نرجعهم للأرض. هذا كان السؤال الرئيسي، بشكل نرجعهم للأرض وبشكل جماعي يشتغلوا مع بعض مش بشكل فردي. كان هذا التحدي الكبير قدامنا.
Okay, so and as the PA came in, it came in with specific economic policies that were aligned more or less with the occupation, that worked in order to displace and dislodge Palestinians from the land through things like forced migration and moving more to the cities, which is a way to liberalize the economy, to allow individualism to sprout, to dream for every Palestinian in their 20s to dream about a job or being employed, and to be able to buy the things that they want, and that kind of leads to consumerism. And so the challenge that we really faced in order to rebuild that identity of cooperativism and that consciousness was basically determined by one key question, which is how do we work with youth that are facing an economy that is that has a very high unemployment, an economy that has been liberalized over the last 20 years, 30 years. And how do we kind of help them return to the land and actually not return to the land as individuals, but return to the land as groups and communities that are rebuilding that land and recultivating it?
عشان هيك شكلنا مجموعات تعاونية وليس تعاونيات بالمفهوم القانوني، لنقدر نكون خارج هذا السياق، سواء سياق الاحتلال أو سياق المنظومة السياسية الاقتصادية الموجودة بفلسطين. وبلشنا قبل عدة سنوات بتجربة تعاونية. هلا بنحكي بعد 5 سنوات 6 سنوات عن أكثر من 30 تجربة شبابية تعاونية نسوية مبنية على فكر وهوية وممارسات تعاونية. بلشت تزرع على دنم، التعاونية الواحدة هلا بتزرع على 10 و15 دنم. شباب خريجين عم بقودها، أسرى محررين هم جزء من هاي الأعضاء لأنهم محرومين من العمل والوظيفة في ظل السياق الفلسطيني، فهم كمان عم بتشغل عائلات وأفراد موجودين بالضفة، حتى عائلات عمال من غزة العالقين بالضفة. مع الصندوق عملنا برنامج لتشغيلهم ضمن هاي التعاونيات، فيها عم بتأدي كمان ممارسات اجتماعية، عم بتقدم سلات غذائية في ظل حرب الإبادة للناس، عم بتساعد المدارس في تحسين غرف صفية أو مساحات زراعية داخل موجود يعني داخل هاي المدارس. فهذا هو الأمل، شباب عم بيرجع للأرض، شباب بهذا الشكل التعاوني بهذا العدد، ونتأمل نوصل لحركة تعاونية حقيقية قادرة أنها تلعب دور في إعادة التنظيم المجتمعي بفلسطين. عشان هيك ربطنا التعاونية مع المؤسسات المجتمعية، المجلس والنادي، ربطناها على أو هذه العلاقة مبنية على الإنتاج الزراعي، الإنتاج الثقافي، الإنتاج المعرفي، الأبحاث. عشان هذا النموذج سميناه نموذج القرية التحررية، القرية اللي فيها تعاون، فيها إنتاج، في مواجهة المستعمرة اللي عم بتضم بالأرض وعم تبني إسمنت. إحنا في المقابل عم نزرع وعم نبني خضار وحياة. وهي هي فلسطين اللي راح تتحرر، ويا مازن كلنا راح نحررها بإيدينا، وآدم والشباب اللي بالشتات وهانيا والكل وكل المتضامنين. احنا ما بنفقد الأمل، لأنه اليأس للجبناء مش إلنا إحنا، ولا ممكن هذا الأمل نفقده. شكرا.
شو بدي أترجم لا أترجم. one sec.
اختصار أدهم، معلش حقك علي، سامحني.
Okay. Okay, so basically, what we started to we started to build cooperatives, but we didn't want to build cooperatives that are disjointed and not connected to each other. We wanted to build a co-ops network, a network of cooperatives that cooperate together, as a way to kind of build outside of the framework of the occupation and outside of also of the framework of the PA, which is in coordination with the occupation. And so right now we reached about 30 cooperatives across these years that we started, I think, in 2015, 2017. 30 youth cooperatives made up of youth and women, co-ops that are working on 1 dunum up to 15 dunums of land. And look up the dunum conversion for acres, but I think it's 1 dunum to 2.4 acres, or the reverse. But other than youth and women in these cooperatives, it also provides work opportunities for freed prisoners who are prevented from working and finding employment in Palestinian society. And so, as marginalized individuals, the cooperatives are a way for livelihood for freed prisoners in Palestine. We also did a campaign with the PSF for Gazan workers who were working in the West Bank, but when the war started, the genocide started on Gaza, they were prevented from returning to Gaza, and they got stranded in the streets of the West Bank, not being able to find any work or any roof over their heads. So we started that campaign in order to give Gazan workers work opportunities at the cooperatives. So there's a lot of communal activities that these cooperatives provide. So it's not just the going back to the land and growing produce, but they also do communal activities, create baskets for families in need, food baskets for families in need, especially in times of like aggression against the Tul Karam refugee camp and so on, or in Ramadan. So there's a growing movement in order to rebuild these communal structures, and the cooperatives. That's the reason why we are building the cooperatives in connection with the community centers that are around them. Any community center in their village, we're trying to build a connection between the cooperatives and these community centers, and build more of a productive and developmental structure. And so we're calling these villages freedom villages, as opposed to the settlements that are starting to, cover the areas around these villages with cement. They're trying to build with cement. We are trying to make a green land, a land that's green and planted and cultivated, because we don't lose hope. We continuously build, and the Palestinian people, we will build it. We will all build it with our hands, whether it's you and us. So everybody's gonna fight for a free Palestine. And I obviously didn't do the ending of his speech justice, but Palestine is, we're seeing I'll add what I'm thinking. We're seeing an inflection point, and the entire international community is fighting for Palestine and has fought for Palestine in the last 2 years. We're seeing the entire Zionist lies break in front of our eyes. And so when a population that is just built on lies, and an occupation that's just built on lies, you see how fragile it is. And the fact is that something that's built for 77 years can come crashing down in one day. And so we're hoping for that day to be sooner than later.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you, Rami. I know this has been quite the lengthy panel. It's, I think we're at the 2 hour mark, and so I really appreciate all of the speakers' time. Mazen, I'll give you, you can talk 1 second. I really appreciate everyone's time. Just before anyone hops off, I want to reiterate the campaign that the Palestinian Social Fund is running right now. We are fundraising, to support these cooperatives, and so I am going to email out some information about that. Someone is holding up our flyer, and I will also compile all the links that were sent in the chat of various papers and initiatives and work that all of our panelists are doing. And so that will all be going out. And if anyone is interested in hosting a fundraiser for the Palestinian Social Fund, please email us. We're super excited to help put those on wherever you live. And finally, I'd also encourage everyone to check out some of the courses that we're offering at the Institute for Social Ecology in 2026. But I'll pass it on to Mazen because I know Mazen will do a good closing out for us.
Well, thank you. And what I'd like to do is maybe after this panel, we can sit down and talk to the Palestinian Social Forum and think of developing collaborations because we're doing some of the same kind of things in different formats, like we're developing what's called HIMAs, similar to what happened in Lebanon. But briefly, I wanted to comment and bridge the four questions from Mason, David, Howard, and Laura and answer them in a couple of sentences together. Basically, the ideas of working in the context of colonization, of course, is always a struggle. And we have, I mean, I have these two books just to show you. This is one book is by Khalil Nakhla about Palestine, a land for sale, and Palestine Limited by Tawfiq Haddad. That we have here. We need to study the system. There's a black feminist writer, poet by the name of Audre Lorde, who said that basically master's tools will not dismantle master's house. So we need to develop our own tools. And with the question about cooperatives and revival, I'm not sure I want revival of anything. I want us to always be thinking outside the box and always thinking of new tools and new technologies and new resources. My background is biology. Species that don't mutate and don't adapt will go extinct. So we have to always be mutable, adaptable, flexible, and thinking of new ways of approaching things. This is what we try to do based on science and research. So that's why I think you're on the right track. We're all on the right track now. The awareness that is spreading is very important. Knowledge is power, and I encourage everybody to learn more, read more. You'll become a better activist, and we welcome you to come and visit us in Palestine, volunteer with us, with Rami and others, and work with us. We're happy to accommodate you, and we make good food. So.
Thank you, Mazen. Well, thank you everyone for coming. Yeah, I really appreciate everyone's time. And yeah, I hope you continue to support the PSF and check out some of the work that we're up to.